Herb Glass. Welcome on the Law Dad Roy podcast. This is our inaugural digital episode. We have to this point done every episode in the studio live. And so we are trying out our remote capabilities. Obviously, something that you know quite a bit about with a law firm that has 20 plus offices. We do a lot digitally, but in the podcast world, this is something that we are still learning. So thanks so much for agreeing to do this. I know that you are obviously extremely busy and I see you most in this room. So why don't you introduce yourself, tell the listeners who you are, what you do, and maybe where you are.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Honored to be a part of it, and honored to be the first digital guest. I've been following along. It's been a fun little journey that y'all have put together, and I'm Herb Glass. I am coming to y'all live from Atlanta, Georgia. I am responsible for basically all things that happen pre-suit at the law firm. What most law firms would call the director of pre-litigation. We don't have a pre-litigation department because the framing on that is not exactly the way that we like to frame those types of cases. We prepare every case at this law firm as if it is going to trial. But as a practical matter, my role is kind of to supervise lawyers and staff for all matters that are pending prior to a lawsuit being filed. And I'm here to help to talk to y'all about that a little bit.
Yeah, and I think, you know, from my perspective, obviously it's critically important, you know, we say, you know, people always say, well, you know, you rise to the occasion or, you know, when you file a case, the case will kind of rise or fall based on what you do at, you know, after that point. And we don't really believe in that. You know, I think that you fall to your level of preparation. So whatever your level of preparation is, that's going to be your baseline in terms of how well that case goes. And so the first, you know, period of the case as it comes into our firm and starts going through our foundation team, which you oversee, I think is a really critical piece. And we're gonna get to some of that and talk through that because I think it's important for the listeners, clients, potential clients, whoever's listening to this to know that the filing of the lawsuit, while that is the point that starts the case in the court system, there is a lot of work that we do before we get to that point. And that is really the critical piece in terms of setting the value of the case and how well the case will go. But first, I want to talk a little bit about Herb. So, Herb, we've been working together for a long time.
9 years or so.
Yeah, quite a while. Why don't you tell us a little bit about why the law, why personal injury law? How did you get, you know, how did you get into this field?
Yeah, so like many folks in undergrad, I didn't really have a clear path. I was a journalism major and a political science major, which is a kind of a frequent story for lawyers that kind of fall backwards into the practice of law. And college, right around the time when it was tough to find a job. You know, journalism was a passion of mine, but the newspaper industry was kind of falling apart at that point. It was right around the time where papers were digitalizing everything, and there was a thought that God, maybe all forms of news media would go away. Turns out that was more of a pivot than it was a death sentence to the journalism industry, and probably for the better. But the job market wasn't great from that perspective. And I'd had some background in politics. I worked for an assemblywoman up in New York at the state capitol and kind of dipped my toes in there. And the person I worked for was general counsel to the assembly member and kind of pushed me towards the law. Like many people, I ended up in Charleston because I went on vacation there and said, "Hey, this is a cool place to go to law school potentially," and was there for 3 years. Did not really develop. Knew I liked to like people, but did not really have a direction or a personal injury in mind when going through that process. So I think it probably took me maturing a little bit. I took a job out of law school at kind of what you call a street law firm, kind of anything that gets in the door. I would help people with. which had its good parts and its drawbacks, but got my feet wet with personal injury, and in my mind, kind of meshed my personal whys with the law. I really found that, like, large companies and insurance companies in particular, large corporations are going to do what they're going to do, which is rip people off when they can and take advantage of them when they can. And I politically, that kind of lines up with the way that I think. As just an individual, that kind of jives with the way that I think about problems in the world, and those things kind of ran parallel. And after I was working at this kind of general practice, I got an opportunity to sign on here for what we now call a role as an associate attorney, which are basically handling cases, kind of on the ground floor, and really developed a passion for it, and really kind of honed in on those values and those ideas that my work has now become a passion of mine, which is to stick up for the little guy, and go to the mat with large corporate defendants and insurance companies every day.
Yeah. And in that role, when you first came in as associate attorney, obviously you were working exclusively, at that point on personal injury cases. That's what that part of the firm does. You've moved, as we all have, through the firm. You were pod leader, we call it, and then a team leader, and then obviously to where you are now, basically with how many people report to you, if you even know?
Yeah, gosh, there's just recently kind of started a new venture at the law firm that has kind of broadened that number out. I probably got 10 or so direct reports, and then under that, a tree of probably close to 50 or 60 people that
Yeah.
indirectly report up to me.
Yeah, so those folks are basically getting all the cases ready on the front end. So when a case comes in our law firm, somebody calls us, somebody messages us, somebody stops by an office, whatever the case may be, however they become a client, that matter gets obviously opened, in our system. They speak with their legal team, right away within 20 hours, kind of however that works. Explain a little bit about, what that front end process looks like today in your world.
So I think there's cases are really won and lost in that initial 90 days. That is how you change the trajectory of a case, by getting folks to good, competent medical doctors, by setting up things correctly with insurance companies, by fleshing out theories of liability that are advantageous on the front end. If you're trying to do all this stuff on the back end, you're doing it the hard way. So yeah, when a case gets booked and opened up to the law firm, we have a unique system, and we call it the foundation team. And I'm responsible for running that team. And what the foundation team does is build the case. So they are the foundation, literally, of the case. So there's a bunch of things.
Okay.
Yep, apropos. There's a bunch of things that need to happen on almost every matter. Insurance claims need to be set up, so they're responsible for
Oh,
sending
all right.
letters of.
We're gonna pause.
You losing me?
We're taking a little break. All right, so our first commercial break here on the podcast, so that's good. So before we left, we were talking a little bit about the foundation team and what that process is. You explained, it's foundation, really the foundation of the case, and you were saying those first 90 days are really critical in terms of the case, how well it's going to go, what the value is going to be for the client. So explain that a little bit for the listeners. What is happening in those first 90 days? Because I think a lot of times people say, well, you're not filing a lawsuit. I know
Yeah,
that,
I think
because I
that's a
haven't received a
that's a
copy of
great
it. I'm
call
not
out,
getting any settlement
and I
offers
think
or
it's one
anything like that. Like,
of the
what
pain
is
points with our
actually
client,
going on in the
is that
background,
exact thing.
that the rest of the world is not
Um,
aware of
you
in those
know,
first 90 days?
and things, if you're a layperson and you've never done this, you would think like some of these things are quite easy. But because of the way the American healthcare system is set up, because of the way that doctors' offices operate, because of the bureaucratic process of insurance companies, all of these things are fights, and they really shouldn't be fights, but they turn out to be fights. So what we're doing in Foundation is We are setting up the case in so much as opening insurance claims, putting insurance companies and corporate defendants on notice of our letters of representations. We're investigating the veracity of your claim, so we're gathering investigative materials, we're talking to witnesses, we're getting incident reports, police reports. We're FOIAing certain information from governmental entities if that's necessary in some cases in order to get them to proffer the things we need to work the case up. If that's a 911 call or a video from an intersection, it's a wreck case, etc. We all
Yeah, so let me just take that piece for example. So a lot of times people call in, they say, hey, I was in a wreck and I was rear-ended, and the incident report or the police report is just wrong. Like I was in my lane and I got hit, and it says that I darted out in front of these people, and that's what happened. So that comes in. A lot of times people think, oh,
Yeah, we're
well, I
trying to
said
change
that
the
the police
narrative
report's just wrong. So
because
like
already
submit
we're
that to the
kind of
insurance company, they'll
working
just
from behind
pay.
the eight ball. The way
Tell us a
insurance
little bit,
companies
about that, and in
are
that
set
type of
up
case, like
is,
what are we
most of
looking
them are
at? What are we
publicly
looking
traded
for to try to help
companies,
that person?
and their MO is to maximize value for their shareholders. The way they do that is they take premiums and they do everything they can to not pay out claims. That is totally the business model, and some are more guilty than others in hanging their insureds out to dry. But they will do anything in their power to not pay a claim pre-suit and make our clients file a lawsuit because they understand that that process is long and lengthy, and some people are not going to want to go through that process, and they'll want to either undersettle their case or give up on it. I think, and I don't want to paint policing with such a broad brush as to say all police work is bad police work. It's not. Sometimes the police don't have an opportunity to talk to both witnesses, and they don't have an opportunity, frankly, to talk to our client because they've been whisked away in an EMS, prior to the police writing the report. But frequently, on the pantheon of things that police are investigating, car wrecks, particularly low impact car wrecks, are not very high on the radar. Police work is a job just like any other job, and there's things that are very important in that job and things that get kicked to the bottom of the bucket. And car wrecks frequently are things that get put in the bottom of the bucket. When you have a police report that's wrong or doesn't fairly represent our side of the narrative, to your point, an insurance company is just not going to take our word that the wreck happened this way or that way. So there's certain things we need to do to change the narrative. Sometimes we'll have to take over the investigation ourselves and reach out to witnesses. Sometimes we will have to hire an accident reconstructionist to go back through and take a look at the mechanics of how the police report is written versus the mechanics of the skid marks on the road and say, like, this is not probable that the wreck happened this way. Sometimes it takes a call to the police officer to say, hey, did you inverted the picture on the report? And the police officer takes a look at it and says, oh my God, yeah, I did. I completely wrote this report backwards. So there's different ways you can change the trajectory of that case through either the investigative process on the insurance side or the investigative process on the government side. But if you don't get to that in the first 90 days, what will happen is an insurance company will become more stubborn and more stubborn to changing their liability decision because of the way that an insurance company is set up. These are multinational companies with different layers of management. Someone's evaluating the claim, they're setting a reserve based on that evaluation. And in order to change the evaluation, they need to have 37 meetings with their supervisor and their supervisor's supervisor in order to actually change the outcome. And that becomes harder and harder to do as the case drags on.
And people forget, right? I mean, the cop forget. They're doing hundreds of wrecks every month. They forget. The witnesses forget. They say, "Oh yeah, I kind of remember." They don't remember if it was the white car, the blue car. After a certain period of time. The other thing that you guys we've had great success with is there are cameras kind of everywhere now, right? People have
That's
these
absolutely,
doorbell cameras. There are
yeah,
dash
most of
cameras.
those
There are government
CCTVs
cameras
will
going out.
re-record over
When
themselves,
necessary,
and
and trying to
if
harvest
you
some
don't
of that
subpoena
camera
them up
footage. There's
front,
a
or at
there's a
least
definite
send
window,
them, put them on notice to
that is
preserve the
stored for,
evidence.
right?
Some of that evidence is gone and cannot be recovered, and that's why it's really important to get counsel involved as early as possible in this whole scenario. We get clients two ways. The clients will call us right after an incident, and that's great. Other folks will perfectly reasonably think that, hey, this is not that complicated. It's a clear liability car accident. I just want my medical bills paid. I don't want to be in debt, for this incident that is no fault of my own. I just want to get back to the place I was prior to whatever happened, which is what the law demands. And insurance companies just won't do it. I mean, we'd be out of a job if insurance companies did what they were supposed to do. Um, they will not, and the longer away in time from the incident, the harder it is to build value from a medical perspective, to make sure people get the treatment
Right.
that they need, to get all those investigative things off the ground. I got to say, there's that old saying, nothing good happens after the streetlights go on. Nothing good happens in a personal injury matter after that 90-day period. It just gets harder and harder to kind of change the narrative.
Yeah, and we talk, all the time. There's this idea, there's this phrase out there, insurance companies deny, delay, defend, right? First, they deny just to see if you'll go away. And there's some percentage of people that do, right? That never pursue it beyond that. They just go away. Otherwise, insurance companies wouldn't do that. If that doesn't work, then they delay it, with the person or the lawyer as long as they can, because they know in that delay, the case is not getting better for the injured person, right? The witnesses are forgetting, cops are forgetting, people are forgetting, and then ultimately, if they have to, they'll go into defense mode. And a lot of times, I know we get cases that other lawyers had prior and decided to get out of, or whatever. We don't have the opportunity once those 90 days have passed to go back and get a lot of that, and so it does make it makes those cases obviously more difficult. And that's just on the liability side. So a lot of times people say, well, look, my case is very straightforward. I was obviously hurt. I'm still treating, why don't I have an offer yet in those first 90 days? So talk a little bit about, I know in your world, helping people, number one, people that don't have health insurance, people that aren't independently wealthy. Medical care is important, so we're able to put people, to work with people to get them into providers that'll actually see them. A lot of times that's difficult if you have Medicaid or Medicare or whatever. We've got a list of folks that will help people on those programs. But a lot of people don't understand, I think, when they're still treating, why they're not getting offers. So explain a little bit about, the concept of like one bite of the apple,
Yeah,
so to speak,
a
and
lot
why
of
it's
these
so
things, to
important in
your
your
earlier point,
world
that
that people
if you
get
don't have health
to,
insurance,
you
or
know,
if you do have certain types of health
treating before
insurance,
we go into the next
um,
phase.
you
Like,
know,
how does that
because
impact
the
the
American healthcare
cases?
system is so kind of slow, and disadvantaged people have a harder time getting into doctors that require upfront payment. There are companies that have kind of stood in the shoes of traditional doctors to help get people through the door. There's different mechanisms that lawyers can use to help get people the treatment that they need. And there's really two or three reasons for that. One is it's good for your health, right? Like, there's nothing that a lawyer can do to make you feel better. That's just not our bag. If you call us and say my elbow hurts, I can't make your elbow feel better. I just can't. I'm not well situated to do that. A doctor needs to do that. If you call me and tell me I can't get into a doctor because they're requiring upfront cost, and that is probably something we can help out with. So one, it's good for your health, and you need to get better. That's first and foremost. Is None of this stuff matters if you're going to be hurting throughout the process. That's our number one concern, is you got to get better. Two, um, insurance companies, what they will do if you were trying the case, your doctors would be called to the stand, and they would be witnesses, and they would testify how you were feeling at this time after the accident versus that time after the accident. Pre-suit, we don't have the ability to get your doctor on the phone and do a three-way call with an insurance adjuster. So your medical records are really a contemporaneous record of how you're feeling, what your treatment path is, how you're doing, whether the effects that this is having on your life. So really good medical records that come from really good doctors are the way that we increase value in a personal injury case, because that's a third party medical specialist saying, I saw this person on this date and this is how they were doing. And insurance companies react to that in different ways by looking at those records and then evaluating the claim. The third thing in this whole thing on why treatment is important is, medical bills are damages in a personal injury action. The way that juries evaluate cases and the way that insurance companies evaluate cases, they usually use that as a starting point because, but for whatever happened through no fault of your own, you have accrued these damages. So it's a direct link to how much am I out? And that's a really good starting point for, what is my case worth? Is, well, what am I at? And there's different parts of the damages soup, if you will. That's just one part of it. But that's a big part of it. I owe these people this amount of money because this thing happened to me, and that is direct causation there. So, why pre-suit? What we're trying to do is give the insurance company a full picture of your injuries, and it's tough to do that prior to what doctors call maximum medical improvement. If you piecemeal these things together and try and get kind of multiple bites at the apple, what an insurance company is going to do is lowball you because anything can happen in the future, and they're going to err on the side of anything that can happen that is going to be bad for your case, where your lawyer is going to set it up that anything can happen, and it could be that you get worse. And so, really, what we want to do is get you to a spot where you've reached MMI, maximal medical improvement, and then start to tell the story about what you went through to get there, and build an offer of compromise that generally goes out to an insurance company or self-insured defendant in most cases that tells that story and puts the insurance company in a position to evaluate that claim from the most favorable light possible.
And I think that's an important point. So when someone is still treating, the insurance company's assumption is that at the end of that course of a
That's right.
treatment, whether it be, 25 physical therapy visits or whether it be a surgery, their assumption for purposes of assigning a value to that damage, to that harm, is that that person will be fixed. Everything will be fine. This medical treatment will take care of it. They're not going to take into account future pain and suffering, future medical bills that might be necessary, or anything else. They're going to say, okay, well, we're expecting to have 10 more physical therapy sessions. We're going to value that, and then we can make you an offer. So that's what a fast settlement is. And maybe you can talk about this in some, example or something, but a lot of times in our cases where people are injured, the largest part of their harm, of their damage, and therefore of their recovery is the future, is the unknown, right? Is the ongoing pain and suffering, the ongoing issues that they're having. It's not the medical bills that they owe to other people. Most of the time, that's actually the smallest part of the harm, right? That's all money, like you said, that's payable to other people. It doesn't go to compensate them at all for what they've been through. It goes to compensate other people for the treatment that they provided.
Yeah, that's
So,
a great
I mean, talk a
point.
little bit about the impact of
And
those,
there's
future
So we see
damages and
this all the
future harm
time
when
in
we
individuals
are,
that are pro
when
se
we are
or
trying to
even
get
come from other
somebody
law firms
appropriately
that
compensated,
don't set the
and
case
what
right
that,
up in the
what that
first
looks
90
like.
days. There'll be an offer of settlement from an insurance company. We just had one yesterday that we went out and booked where someone got hit by a dump truck as a pedestrian, and there's a $2 million policy. There's a need for future surgery, and the insurance company offered him $31,000. That is a story that we hear every single day where, to your point, that $31,000 probably had something to do with past meds. So went
Yeah.
through conservative treatment.
Right.
Conservative treatment did not work, and now this client is sitting there and needs a surgery that probably costs
Yeah.
upwards of 150 to $200,000, and the $31,000 that the insurance company is offering to pay him is not going to pay for that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, let's just talk about the number because people think, oh, insurance companies are looking at my damage, they're making me a fair offer. If I go hire a lawyer, that just means that I'm gonna have to get the lawyer, a third or 40% or whatever it is in order to, get that same amount of money. Insurance companies know what they're doing, right? So they know if somebody's unrepresented. So you have an offer of $31,000. This is a person that was hit by a dump truck. They've got $2 million in coverage, probably corporate assets, well, definitely corporate assets. They at least own a dump truck, whether or not there's a lien on it, who knows. But there are assets there. There's money there to make sure someone's fully compensated. Hard to believe
Yeah, you're
somebody
right.
could get hit by a dump truck
Yeah,
and
you're
only
absolutely right.
have $31,000 in damages. So they're probably arguing about what medical treatment was related or what. I know nothing about this particular case. I've just seen so many of these. I've seen so many of these. Somebody gets hit by a dump truck and they have a heart attack and they say, oh, well, the heart attack's not related. We're only going to pay for the broken leg or whatever. And it's like, well, I wasn't having a heart attack before I got hit by the dump truck. And like getting hit by the dump truck, obviously caused a heart attack. Well, and then they're like, well, yeah, Medicare. So Medicare paid for all of that. So we don't have to pay for any of that. Actually, all we're paying for is just your pain and suffering for going through the medical treatment. It's like, well, no, that's not how that works either. I had Medicare or I had health insurance, which I paid for. You still have to pay me back for that. And people get tricked. You look at $31,000. First of all, a very specific number, right? Which makes the person think, oh, they actually thought about this. It's not just some low
Yeah.
ball random. It's not 30,000 or 40,000 or 20,000. It's 31,000. It's very specific. Interestingly, is this I don't know, South Carolina, North Carolina, or Georgia, or where this case, South Carolina. Okay. So I think like average income in South Carolina is like $34,000 a year or something. So I don't know anything, about this person, like what they did or whatever, but that's interesting. So it's like almost as much as somebody makes in a year. Like that sounds like a lot of money, to somebody who was on foot and, got hit by a truck. And, they use all the things. They tell people, oh, you don't have to pay taxes on this, which is actually true. You get all that money. You don't have to pay a lawyer out of it. You get all that money. You don't have to pay anything back out of it, which may or may not be true, that depending on the circumstances. So you get all that money. It's like getting a
Yep.
year of free income. How awesome is that? Just sign right here and waive
And I
all your
think that
claims.
there's this
And
thought
then
that
you
like,
find out, well, you have another
and
heart
you hear
attack
this
because
from
your heart was
plaintiffs lawyers a
compromised,
lot,
and
that
then
like
you're having heart
insurance
attacks every 5 years
adjusters
or
or
whatever the
insurance
case may
companies are
be.
stupid.
But like
I
that's
don't
how
I
they
don't
that's how
think I
they
would
do
frame it
people.
that
I
way.
mean,
I think they are like their job is to assess risk, and their literal duty to their shareholders is to pay out as little as they can in order to maximize returns. So insurance companies are really investment. There's a commercial right now with Peyton Manning and Nationwide where he said, "Do you know Nationwide is the second biggest financial services company out there?" Yeah, I knew that. Like everyone should know that. That's their game plan. Yeah, these are not.
and take Geico. It's owned by Berkshire Hathaway. I was just watching, Warren Buffett retire or whatever, or say he's retiring by the end of the year and all this. But as part of that,
They
I saw this stat.
spend
Berkshire
Progressive, I
Hathaway
think,
has
is in the top
outkicked like the S&P
10,
average by
maybe
140 times over
5
the course of
from
the
a
last
marketing
30 years. Like they are
perspective
just
of
killing it. And Geico
Fortune
obviously is a
500
part of that,
companies.
right?
Like they
Very
outspent
profitable
Coca-Cola
insurance
last year,
company for them.
McDonald's, all on flow. And the idea is flow will get the business on the incomes, collect the premiums, and insurance adjusters on the back end will not pay out claims. So to your point, that $31,000 is an intentional number. It's framed in a way to trick
Yeah.
a pro se individual. And I do know a little bit about the case. I mean, that is undervalued by not hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars, but hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so much so that, on a case like that, like I would even be okay with making a deal with the client that said, we don't get more than $31,000. You don't owe us anything. Make the potential client feel comfortable about that. Like, that's how, yeah,
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because a lot of times people don't know it. They're like, oh, well, I'm gonna come and then you're gonna give me a $40,000 offer. I'm gonna have to give you a third of it. I'm gonna be out,
yeah,
and it's like, no, it's not about that. Like this is such a significant undervalue. And I mean, good for this person, man, whatever it is, for at least having an idea that, well,
oh,
maybe
yeah,
I should make a phone call, and explore that. Because but if it wasn't successful, to your point, these companies wouldn't do it, right? There are a lot of people that are taking that $1,000 offer. But for us, that's why it's critical that you get to that maximum medical improvement so that we can make sure we have one opportunity to get you one opportunity to settle your case. If something comes up later, we don't get to go back and ask the insurance company for more money. Once you've settled, it's over. So we want to make sure, and you want to make sure, people want to make sure that their case is valued correctly on the front end. And that's really, that maximum medical improvement piece. So I think that's a really good point. And it'll be interesting, I'd be interested to know, like,
Yeah,
what
yeah,
is our
we
first
see
offer
that a good
back when we
bit
send
where
our offer of
just
compromise once we've done
and just
everything
so
that we
people
do on the
know,
case,
one of the
and we
things
say,
that drives
pay
case
us X
value,
dollar. Like, what
it's
is their
setting the
first
case
offer
right,
to us?
setting the case up right, getting people to good doctors, but it's also threat of litigation, right? So like the one thing that our client couldn't do in that scenario is go out and file a lawsuit and create a story that they could. That's it. File a lawsuit and present a story that would make the insured feel as though they had some exposure.
Well, they could. You
And
could file a
it's
lawsuit
not a
per se,
hyperbole
but
to say that
no,
there
no one
probably
really cares.
is XX exposure on a case with a back surgery because you don't know if the first back surgery is going to take or he's going to need another back surgery. To your point, he's not at MMI, and we don't really know what MMI is going to look like. He might be into it for another $500,000 in medical bills before it's all said and done. He might not be able to work,
Right.
ever again. You know,
And that should be compensated too. Like
that's
that
right.
has to be part of the factor.
That's
What
right.
does your work look like
And the
going
law
forward?
firm
Are you
that
going
you
to be able to
pick
work? Are you going to be able
matters
to do the
too,
same
right?
thing? Are
So,
you going to be able to
if
earn
you,
the same amount of
if,
money? All of
insurance
that goes
companies,
into it.
to
Those
my
are the
earlier point,
biggest
they're
parts
not
of the damage a lot
stupid.
of times
They
is
keep like
how's your
literal
life
books
changed?
on law firms and they have software that
Right.
yeah. Who's going to actually push the envelope and file a lawsuit? Who's not going to push the envelope and file a lawsuit? And the great thing about law firms that
We get those
are
in the
set
bad faith
up
cases.
with
We get when
litigation
we have filed
practices and
bad faith
healthy
cases, we
litigation
get
practices like our law firm is, you have the ability to leverage that pre-suit. And insurance companies respect that. And it's not uncommon for us to see 10, 15, 20 time multiplier on pre-suit pro se offers and that still be undervalued, frankly. That's what.
you still have work to do at that point and may have to end up filing a lawsuit to get full value, assuming the client, is willing to get full value, which, takes time, right? There's always a trade-off. And that's what I always try to counsel people when I'm talking to them. There's a trade-off between speed and settlement, right? Settlement value. So the quicker you're going to get a settlement value, the quicker you're going to
That's
get a
it.
case settled, you're probably giving up some of the value, by increasing the speed. Slow it down, do everything that needs to be done, you're probably increasing the settlement value of that case, right? By turning over every stone, looking under every rock, figuring it out, getting the treatment that's necessary. So there's a trade-off there. We are not, and we've always said this, we are not a law firm that, you know, promises, well, first of all, we don't promise any timeline of a result. We can talk about averages and those sorts of things, but it's beyond our control really to promise a result because the course of treatment is dictated by doctors, right? And the client and biology. And that's a really big driving factor. And then we have, how's the insurance company going to respond? We don't control that. And so however they respond, we're prepared and we'll go the distance all the way to trial if necessary. But those things take time. And so, I think it's really interesting to talk about the front end of the case and kind of how all that plays into it. And we're definitely going to have you back on. We got a whole other piece of this puzzle that you're involved in to talk through and talk about. But that's our time for purposes of this episode, our first digital episode, our first episode with a
Oh gosh.
commercial break. And so
I'm
we
my
appreciate
cousin Vinny guy.
you coming on and working with us,
If
Herb.
you know
And
me, my
final
Italian heritage runs deep,
last
and that one
question,
speaks to me. Oh, it
favorite
speaks to
legal movie and why?
me. Thanks. Is it?
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Herb. We'll see you soon. Thank you for listening to the Law Dad Roy podcast. If you have any questions for me that we can talk about on the pod, follow us, DM us on Instagram, reach out on Instagram. We're at Law Dad Roy. You can find us there on YouTube, Facebook, wherever you decide to connect. We look forward to hearing from you.
That's it for another episode of the Law Dad Roy podcast. On next week's pod, Chris Covert, PWA's Chief Growth Officer, will be returning to talk with Law Dad Roy about business growth during the time of AI, overcoming the hurdles of startup, and what he has learned in over 15 years in the marketing industry. It's one you won't want to miss. See you next and every Monday at 9 Eastern, wherever you find your podcasts.